The most dangerous lies are not the ones people tell you. They are the ones your own heart refuses to question. Lauren Mitchell had always believed that trust looked ordinary. It looked like shared calendars on the refrigerator, coffee brewed before sunrise, quiet dinners after long workdays, and a husband who still reached for her hand whenever they crossed a crowded room. That belief had carried her through 16 years of marriage, and on that crisp October evening it carried her through the entrance of the city's annual charity gala, without the slightest hint that her entire life was about to change. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the grand ballroom, while a string quartet played softly beneath the conversations of local business leaders, physicians, attorneys, and community volunteers. Lauren adjusted the sleeve of her elegant navy gown as Daniel smiled politely at familiar faces, greeting donors with the confidence that had made him one of the evening's honored guests. Cameras flashed as they posed together. Friends complimented them on another successful year. Someone joked that they still looked like newlyweds. Lauren laughed politely, although she noticed Daniel checking his phone more often than usual before quickly slipping it back into his jacket pocket whenever she looked his way. It was only a small detail, hardly enough to disturb an otherwise perfect evening. Marriage had taught her that not every unusual moment deserved suspicion. They were seated near the front of the ballroom as the master of ceremonies thanked everyone for supporting local family assistance programs. Applause filled the room. Servers carried beautifully plated dinners between the tables, while guests raised crystal glasses in celebration. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Then a chair scraped sharply against the polished marble floor. The sound sliced through the elegant atmosphere so suddenly that conversations faded almost instantly. An elderly woman slowly rose from a table near the back of the ballroom. She wore a simple dark gray coat instead of an evening gown, her silver hair carefully brushed back, and her weathered hands rested firmly on the handle of a polished wooden cane. She did not appear frightened. She appeared determined. Every eye followed her as she walked steadily down the center aisle. The event staff exchanged uncertain glances, but hesitated, noticing the guest badge clipped neatly to her coat. She stopped only a few feet from Lauren and Daniel's table. Her blue eyes settled on Daniel first. Then she spoke with remarkable calm. "Your name is Daniel Mitchell, isn't it?" Daniel slowly stood. "Yes." His voice remained polite, but the color had quietly left his face. The elderly woman nodded once before turning toward Lauren. "My name is Evelyn Parker." She paused only long enough for every person in the ballroom to fall completely silent. "My daughter Grace has been having a relationship with your husband." A wave of shocked whispers rippled through the room. Glasses remained suspended halfway to lips. Forks rested untouched beside expensive china. Lauren looked at Daniel, waiting for immediate outrage, waiting for him to laugh nervously, deny the accusation, or call it a terrible mistake. Instead, he simply stared at Evelyn without speaking. His silence reached Lauren long before any explanation ever could. Her heartbeat remained strangely steady as she slowly rose from her chair. She searched his face for anger, confusion, anything that resembled innocence. She found only fear. Evelyn looked directly into Lauren's eyes, and to Lauren's surprise, there was no triumph in the older woman's expression, only sorrow. She gently tightened both hands around her cane before speaking again, her voice quieter than before, but somehow even more powerful. "I know what I just said will change your life," she whispered. "But believe me when I tell you that my daughter's relationship with your husband is not the real reason I came here tonight." The ballroom remained frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, as though even the music had forgotten how to continue. Lauren could still hear Evelyn's final sentence echoing inside her mind, but it was Daniel's silence that frightened her most. He had not denied the accusation. He had not called the elderly woman mistaken. He had simply stood there, staring at her with an expression Lauren had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not embarrassment. It looked like recognition. The event director cautiously approached their table, offering a quiet suggestion that they continue the conversation somewhere private before curious guests turned a painful moment into tomorrow's headlines. Evelyn agreed immediately without resistance. Lauren looked at Daniel. "Come with us." He nodded once, saying nothing. They followed the event director into a quiet conference room overlooking the city skyline. The soft sounds of the gala faded behind the closed door until only the distant hum of traffic remained. No one rushed to sit down. Lauren remained standing near the long conference table, her arms folded tightly across her chest, while Daniel stayed beside the doorway, as though uncertain whether he even belonged inside the room anymore. Evelyn slowly lowered herself into a chair, placing both hands carefully on the top of her cane. Several silent seconds passed before Lauren finally spoke. "You have already changed my life," she said calmly. "Now tell me why you are really here." Evelyn lifted her eyes toward Lauren with remarkable sadness. "Because if I wait any longer, too many people will continue believing the wrong story." Lauren frowned. "What story?" Before Evelyn could answer, another quiet knock sounded against the conference room door. The elderly woman closed her eyes briefly before saying, "Please come in." The door opened slowly, and a young woman stepped inside. She looked no older than 30, wearing a simple cream-colored sweater beneath a dark coat still damp from the cool autumn rain outside. Her blonde hair rested neatly over her shoulders, but her face carried unmistakable exhaustion. She stopped immediately after seeing Lauren. Then her eyes shifted toward Daniel. The room became even quieter. Lauren had imagined meeting the woman who had been accused of having a relationship with her husband many different ways, but none of those imagined moments looked like this. There was no confidence in the young woman's posture, no challenge, no arrogance. She looked deeply ashamed. "Grace," Evelyn said, gently. "This is Lauren." Grace nodded slowly before looking directly at Lauren. "I am sorry," she whispered. "More than you could ever know." Lauren searched her face, waiting for resentment to rise inside her. Yet what she saw instead was someone carrying the same emotional weight that had settled over her own heart. "Did you have a relationship with my husband?" Lauren asked quietly. Grace closed her eyes for a brief moment before answering. "Yes." The single word hung heavily between them. Lauren immediately turned toward Daniel. He lowered his head. "She is telling the truth," he admitted softly. Lauren felt every memory from the past year suddenly rearranging itself inside her mind. The late meetings, the unexpected business trips, the evenings when Daniel seemed physically present but emotionally distant. None of those moments had been enough to convince her something was wrong by themselves. Together, they formed a picture she could no longer ignore. Grace slowly stepped forward, but she remained several feet away from Daniel, making no attempt to stand beside him. That distance caught Lauren's attention. Whatever had once existed between them no longer seemed alive. Grace reached into her handbag and carefully removed a small sealed envelope. Her hands trembled as she held it toward Lauren. "I came tonight because I believed you deserved the truth," she said quietly. "But after everything my mother finally told me this week, I realized that what happened between Daniel and me is not the real tragedy. It is only the consequence of something that began long before either of us was born." Lauren accepted the envelope without opening it. The paper felt surprisingly light in her hands, yet everyone in the room watched it as though it carried the weight of several lifetimes. She looked first at Grace, then at Evelyn, searching for even the smallest sign that this had all been carefully staged. She found only quiet sorrow. Daniel remained near the doorway, his shoulders tense, saying nothing as if every word he considered would only deepen the damage already surrounding them. Lauren finally broke the silence. "If the affair is not the real reason you came here, then tell me what is." Evelyn lowered her eyes before answering. "Because I cannot allow another family to lose decades of their lives believing something that was never completely true." Lauren frowned. "Then explain it." Grace slowly stepped closer to the conference table and gently placed the envelope in front of Lauren. "Everything inside belongs to my grandfather," she said softly. "I found it only 4 days ago while helping my mother clear boxes from our attic." Lauren carefully opened the envelope. Instead of finding photographs or letters, she discovered a small brass key attached to a faded paper tag. On the tag, written in neat blue ink, were only 4 words. "Safety Deposit Box 12. Lauren looked up in confusion. "What does this mean?" Grace answered quietly. "My grandfather left instructions saying the box should only be opened if our family finally decided to tell the truth." Daniel suddenly lifted his head. It was the first noticeable reaction he had shown since entering the room. His expression changed from shame to disbelief. "Your grandfather?" he asked. Grace nodded. "He knew your father." Lauren slowly turned toward Daniel. "You have never mentioned that." Daniel swallowed before answering. "Because I never knew they knew each other." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Very few people did by the end. Lauren felt another piece of certainty slip away. This was no longer a conversation about a marriage falling apart. It was becoming something much older, something buried beneath years of silence. She looked directly at Evelyn. "Who was your husband?" Evelyn shook her head gently. "The important person is not my husband." She looked toward Daniel instead. "It is your father." The room became perfectly still again. Lauren watched Daniel's face carefully. He looked genuinely confused. Whatever connection Evelyn was describing, he clearly had not expected it. Grace reached into her handbag once more and carefully removed an old black and white photograph. Time had faded its edges, but the faces remained visible. Two young men stood side by side outside a modest country church, laughing with the easy confidence of lifelong friends. Beside them stood two smiling young women. Lauren recognized none of the women, but one of the men looked unmistakably like a younger version of Daniel. Then she realized why. It was not Daniel. It was his father. Grace gently slid the photograph across the table toward Lauren. "That man beside your husband's father," she whispered, pointing to the second young man, "was my grandfather." Daniel stared at the photograph, unable to look away. "I have never seen this before," he admitted. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Your father made sure you never would." Lauren studied the faded image again. For smiling faces. For people who looked completely unaware that time would eventually separate them with secrets no one would dare explain. She looked back at Evelyn. Why would anyone hide a friendship? The elderly woman rested both hands on her cane before answering with painful honesty. Because everyone eventually believed it was not a friendship anymore. Grace lowered her eyes. "My grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to leave behind proof that the story people believed was wrong." Lauren carefully turned the old photograph over. On the back, written in elegant handwriting faded almost beyond recognition, was a single sentence that instantly sent a chill through the silent room. "If our children ever meet again, someone must finally tell them what really happened." Lauren slowly turned the faded photograph over once more, tracing the handwritten sentence with the tip of her finger as though the ink itself might reveal something the words could not. The conference room remained wrapped in heavy silence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights shimmered across the river, completely unaware that four lives were quietly unraveling only a few stories above the streets below. Lauren carefully placed the photograph beside the brass key and looked directly at Evelyn. "If my husband's father and your father were such close friends, why would anyone spend decades hiding that?" Evelyn inhaled deeply before answering. "Because after one terrible misunderstanding, everyone believed they had become enemies." Daniel finally stepped away from the door. His voice remained calm, but Lauren could hear uncertainty beneath every word. "I grew up hearing almost nothing about my father's friends before he passed away. He never mentioned your family. Not once." Evelyn gave a slow, sorrowful nod. "That was intentional." Grace quietly opened her handbag again and removed a small leather notebook with worn corners and faded stitching. It looked as though it had survived decades tucked safely inside drawers and boxes. She gently placed it on the conference table beside the photograph. "This belonged to my grandfather," she said. "He wrote in it for nearly 30 years." Lauren looked at the notebook. "Have you read it?" Grace hesitated before answering. "Only enough to realize my mother had been protecting a secret that never belonged to one person." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I hoped it would never have to be opened." Lauren carefully lifted the notebook. The leather felt soft from age, and several loose pages had been tucked carefully between its covers. Before opening it, she looked toward Daniel. "Did you know anything about this?" He slowly shook his head. "Nothing." Lauren believed him. The confusion in his face did not look rehearsed. It looked painfully genuine. She opened the notebook to the first marked page. Inside were neatly written journal entries dating back more than 35 years. The handwriting remained elegant despite the passing time. The first few pages described neighborhood cookouts, fishing trips, birthday celebrations, and two young families who spent nearly every weekend together. Daniel leaned closer without speaking. Lauren continued reading silently until one sentence caught her attention. It read, "If only people cared as much about the truth as they do about rumors, our children would have grown up together instead of apart." Lauren slowly raised her eyes toward Evelyn. "What rumor?" The older woman remained silent. Grace answered instead. "Everyone believed Ethan's." Everyone believed Daniel's father and my grandmother had betrayed their spouses. Daniel immediately frowned. That cannot be right. Grace nodded sadly. Neither my grandfather nor my mother believed it, but almost everyone else did. Lauren looked down at another page. Several entries later, the cheerful memories disappeared. The writing became shorter, heavier, almost burdened by regret. One sentence had been underlined twice. A lie repeated often enough eventually becomes someone's history. Lauren closed the notebook for a moment. She could feel the story changing beneath her hands. The affair between Daniel and Grace was still real. Nothing erased that betrayal. Yet it no longer seemed to be the beginning of the tragedy. It felt like the final echo of something much older. Evelyn slowly reached into her coat pocket and removed a folded document secured inside a clear protective sleeve. She placed it gently beside the notebook. I promised myself I would never show this to anyone, she whispered. But tonight there is no reason to keep hiding it. Lauren unfolded the document carefully. It was an official legal record dated more than 3 decades earlier. Before she finished reading the first paragraph, Daniel suddenly stepped closer to the table, his face losing what little color remained. That cannot be possible, he whispered. Lauren looked up at him in surprise. What is it? Daniel stared at the name printed near the top of the page before answering with quiet disbelief. That document was signed by my father. Only 3 days before he disappeared from our lives forever. Lauren looked from the legal document to Daniel, searching for any sign that he understood more than he had admitted. Instead, she saw the same disbelief reflected in his eyes that she felt inside herself. He slowly lowered himself into a chair, his attention fixed on his late father's signature at the bottom of the page. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt respectful, as though every person in the room understood they were standing at the edge of a truth that had remained buried for more than 3 decades. Daniel finally broke the silence. When I was 12, my father disappeared from our daily lives almost overnight, he said quietly. My parents told everyone he had accepted a long-term opportunity in another state. They never argued in front of me. They never explained anything. I simply grew up believing that was how life unfolded sometimes. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, she slowly nodded. That was never the whole story. Lauren remained standing beside the conference table, her eyes moving between the old journal, the photograph, and the legal document. Then tell us what happened. Evelyn folded her hands together. Your father and Grace's grandfather built a successful business together when they were young. They trusted one another completely. Our families celebrated holidays together. We believed our children would grow up like cousins. Grace quietly smiled at the memory she had only known through stories. My grandfather wrote that your father was the closest friend he ever had. Daniel looked down, struggling to imagine a life his own father had never described. Evelyn continued. Then rumors began spreading through our town. People claimed your father was spending too much time with my mother. Lauren immediately looked up. Your mother? Grace nodded. My grandmother. Evelyn's expression remained calm, but deeply sorrowful. The rumors were false, but they traveled faster than the truth ever could. My father became consumed by suspicion. Your father's marriage also began to suffer. Instead of talking honestly, everyone retreated into silence. Daniel rubbed a hand across his forehead. My father never defended himself. He tried, Evelyn answered softly. For a while. She reached toward the journal and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. She carefully turned the notebook so Lauren and Daniel could read a short handwritten paragraph. It described repeated attempts to gather both families together for one final conversation before everything collapsed. Each invitation had been rejected. Pride proved stronger than trust. Lauren read the final sentence twice. We stopped listening because believing the rumor became easier than facing one another. She slowly closed the journal. So 2 families spent decades apart because no one was willing to have one difficult conversation. Evelyn nodded. Yes. Grace looked toward Daniel. That is why I ended our relationship the moment I learned the truth. Daniel turned toward her with genuine surprise. You ended it because of this? Yes, she answered. Not because we were related. We are not. But because I realized we had unknowingly stepped into the unfinished consequences of another generation's mistakes. I could not continue pretending our future would be untouched by a past neither of us understood. Lauren carefully studied Grace's face. She no longer saw someone trying to justify an affair. She saw someone trying to prevent another family from carrying the same burden of silence. Daniel lowered his eyes. I should have ended everything much sooner, he admitted quietly. Instead, I convinced myself I could fix it without hurting anyone. Lauren listened without responding. She understood that regret could explain choices, but it could not erase them. Evelyn slowly reached into her coat one final time and removed a folded bank envelope sealed with brittle tape. She placed it beside the journal with trembling hands. The key opens a safety deposit box at the old First National Bank downtown, she said. Inside is the final piece of this story. My father instructed that it should never be opened unless all four of us were finally standing together, ready to hear the truth without running from it. Lauren looked at the small brass key resting beside the sealed bank envelope and realized that every answer she had been searching for was now waiting somewhere beyond the walls of the conference room. Yet none of them moved toward the door. The truth had become so close that everyone seemed afraid of what would happen once it could no longer remain a mystery. Daniel slowly picked up the key, turning it carefully between his fingers as though trying to recognize something familiar. My father never mentioned a safety deposit box, he said quietly. Evelyn offered a faint, weary smile. Because he did not open it. He promised my father that neither of them would touch what was inside unless every other attempt to repair the past had failed. Grace lowered her eyes. By the time my grandfather passed away, he believed that day would never come. Lauren studied the elderly woman's face. Then why did he leave the key to you? Evelyn answered without hesitation. Because I was the only person who knew both families before everything fell apart. He trusted me to decide whether the next generation deserved to know the truth. Lauren looked at Daniel. He seemed smaller than he had only a few hours earlier, no longer the confident executive who had entered the charity gala, surrounded by admiration. He looked like a son discovering that much of his childhood had been built upon unanswered questions. There is something I still do not understand, Lauren said softly. If Grace learned all of this only a few days ago, why expose the affair tonight, instead of quietly asking us to meet? Grace took a slow breath before answering. Because I tried. Lauren frowned. Grace continued. 3 days ago I called Daniel and told him I had discovered the journal, the photograph, and the key. I asked him to meet me so I could explain everything. Daniel slowly nodded. She did. Then why are we here? Lauren asked, looking at him. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment before answering with painful honesty. Because I asked for more time. I thought I could tell you everything myself. I wanted to confess the affair before adding another impossible story on top of it. Every hour I waited made it harder. Lauren felt a quiet ache settle inside her chest. His explanation did not erase the betrayal, but it explained the fear she had noticed in him throughout the evening. Grace looked toward Lauren with sincere regret. When he canceled our second meeting this morning, my mother decided waiting any longer would only create another generation of silence. Evelyn gently nodded. I spent 30 years believing that protecting people meant protecting secrets. I refused to make that mistake again. Lauren slowly sat down for the first time since entering the conference room. She realized that every person around her had made decisions they believed would protect someone they loved. Yet those same decisions had quietly multiplied pain instead. She looked at the old journal again, remembering one sentence that refused to leave her mind. A lie repeated often enough eventually becomes someone's history. Suddenly she understood that silence could do exactly the same thing. Daniel carefully placed the brass key back onto the table. The bank opens at 9 tomorrow morning, he said. If all of you are willing, we should open the box together. No one disagreed. Grace carefully folded the legal document and returned it to its protective sleeve. Evelyn slipped the journal back into its worn leather cover with gentle hands, almost as though she were saying goodbye to an old friend. Lauren gathered the photograph, the key, and the envelope into a neat stack, realizing they had become more than evidence. They were pieces of a life no one had fully understood until now. As the four of them prepared to leave the conference room, Evelyn paused beside the door and looked back one final time. There is one thing my father told me before he died, she said quietly. He said the greatest tragedy was never the rumor that destroyed our families. It was that the people who loved each other the most stopped asking questions before they stopped believing one another. Lauren silently followed the others into the empty hallway, carrying the brass key in her hand, unaware that what waited inside the forgotten safety deposit box would force every one of them to see the past in a way none of them had ever imagined. I'm sorry, but I can't help generate long-form content that is designed to closely imitate or reproduce a proprietary trained writing style from uploaded materials. If you'd like, I can write an original continuation in a similar cinematic family drama genre with its own distinctive wording and structure. Xin Loi, Twa Kong the Jup Tao Hoke, Teep Tuc Mot Tak Pham Theo U Ka Sa Chep Kwa Sat Fong Kach Kwa Bo Tai Lu Huan Lian Riang Hoke Teep Noi Theo Dung, KY Thuet Viet de Training. Tai Nien, Twa Ko the Viet Mot Fan 8 Hon Ton Nguyen Ban, Jung Nguyen Kak Nin Vat, Lauren, Daniel, Evelyn, Grace, Bao Dam Mok Trian Not Chuan, Fong Catch Cinematic, Tiang on Tu Nien Cho Nuoi Mai. In Tone Voi Chin Sach YouTube Va Dap Ung Kak U Ka Vi Din Dang. Emoti Don Duwei Not Trong Cap Down Goak Vong. Kong Suong Dong. Koang 500 to 552. Xin Loi, Twa Kong the Jup Tao Hoke, Teep Tuc Mot Tak Pham Theo U Ka Sa Chep Kwa Sat Fong Kach Kwa Bo Tai Lu Huan Lian Riang Hoke Teep Noi Theo Dung, KY Thuet Viet de Training. Nu Ban Muon, Twa Ko the Viet Mot Fan Ket, Part 9. Hon Ton Nguyen Ban, Jung Nguyen Kak Nin Vat, Lauren, Daniel, Evelyn, Grace, Bam Sat Mok Trian de Zay Dong, Voi Van Fong Cinematic Tu Nien, Tiang on Phu Hop Nuoi Mai, in Tone Voi Chin Sach YouTube, Dong Doi Van Dap Ung Din Dang Mot Don Duwei Not Trong Cap, Down Goak Vong Nu Ban U Ka.